Today in philosophy, we're going to discuss Confucius. That's my favorite class today. If I was to go to a local mall and look for t-shirts, I would probably find one with a Confucius quote on it. If I was to go to my computer and Google quote of the day, I would more often than not get something that Confucius said. Confucius is probably the best known, or is the best known, of all the Asian philosophers in the Western world. So who was he? Well, Confucius was born into poverty. He had a dad who was quite well-to-do, but his dad died when he was very young. So Confucius was born into poverty. He managed to support his family, his mom and his brother, and he managed to become educated. He became educated, and he ended up serving in a court of a local ruler. The local ruler, he had some difficulty with because he felt the local ruler was not ruling in a virtuous manner. So he left the court, and it is said he traveled. It is said that he met up with Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism that we talked about earlier in the week. There's all kinds of stuff said about his travels. And he had lots of ideology, lots of virtuous ideology that people started to follow, and some of his followers wrote down. They wrote it down in a book called the Analects. That's how it's known in English anyway. The Analects have all kinds of stories and some quotes that give his point of view on the world. So what was his point of view on the world? Well, Confucius believed in being virtuous. He believed in parents. He, in his life, supported from a young age his mother. And he believed everybody should do that. He believed that your parents, when you are very small, they give up everything to care for you, to make sure that you are clothed and you are dressed, and you are well fed and you get along well in society. That's the job of parents. But as he believed, as parents get older, they need help from the children, and you should do that. You should spend time with your parents, and you should help your parents along. And when they die, you should mourn for them. That's what children do, according to Confucius. What else did he believe? He believed that roles were very important. He believed that, take my job, the teacher. The teacher has a role to give knowledge, and students should sit back and listen to this knowledge. I don't know if that's entirely believed in the same magnitude today as Confucius might have thought that it should be. However, he believed that people should listen to superiors. And interestingly, he uses a story in the Analects to describe this, and how it's relayed to me was the story is that you should, as a subject, bend to your ruler like grass bends in the wind. And I find this very interesting because a very similar story came out about 50 or 80 years before that, roundabout, in a book called Aesop's Fables, written in Greece, in Europe, around the Mediterranean. And the story is very similar. The story is the story known as the Great Oak and the Reed, where there is a great oak, and the great oak tree is talking to a reed, and the great oak tree says, "I am strong and mighty and powerful, and nothing can defeat me," he says to the lowly little reed that's flopping around all over the place in the wind. And the reed says, "When I grow up, I would like to be just like the big oak." However, shortly after that, a storm comes along, and the reed, which is flopping around all over the place in the wind, after the storm is not harmed, but he looks over and he sees the great oak tree, and the great oak tree is horizontal. He could not bow to the wind, and as a result, he was bowed over. And that's a very popular story in Aesop's Fables. And I find it interesting that 50 or 80 or 100 years later, it comes up in the teachings of Confucius. I think there was probably more communication amongst groups of people in Asia and Europe than most intellectuals realize at that time. However, back to Confucius. Confucius believed in respect for parents. He believed in respect for those in authority. He believed in change, slow change over time, and he believed in being virtuous. He believed rulers should be virtuous. They should lead by example. So overall, that's a summation of Confucius. He also, the best summation of his philosophy would be his interpretation of the Golden Rule. In the West, we say the Golden Rule, don't do to anybody that which you don't want done to you. Well, Confucius said that first, and that's exactly what he said. He said, he was quoted in the Analects as saying, do not inflict upon others that which you do not want inflicted upon yourself. So I guess that's the earliest written documentation of the Golden Rule. That's it for today's lesson on Confucius, boys and girls. Have a good day.